Guys, this is Faye from Feisworld Media. I am covering day 9 of 30-day live, and today's topic is really special, and it's very dear and close to my heart related to podcasting. So today we're going to talk about how you can start as a podcaster, how you can start your own podcast. Maybe you're starting one for your client, who knows? And tomorrow we're going to talk about how to grow your podcast, which is a whole other game. So if you're watching, please let me know where you're from and perhaps you're thinking about or contemplating about starting your own podcast. The world of podcasting and the landscape of podcasting has changed completely drastically since when I started my journey in 2014. So, a bit of a background on that. So, when I did that, it wasn't super duper popular. What does it mean? Roughly around 250,000 podcasts on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, whereas today they're well over 1 million. However, there's something that's really interesting you should keep in mind is that there are a lot of podcasters who start their show and quit on average after the 7th episode. So if you are new and if you are thinking about starting your show, remember that even though there is competition, but the people who stick around for the long game will win. And hello, Sam. Good to see you again. I'm wondering, are you a podcaster? Or if not, are you currently a podcaster? Question number one. Number two, what are your favorite podcasts right now? Things that you listen to on a regular basis. So today, I want this conversation to be about podcasting. And please jump right in with your questions. Maybe you're thinking about starting your own show, maybe by yourself, hosting by yourself. Maybe you're thinking about hosting it with somebody else. And, or maybe you have started your show, you're 7, 10 episodes in, but you feel a little bit stuck and you want to maybe grow your show or you want to find better ways to produce it to save a little bit of time. So, with that said, well, let's get started. As I'm seeing questions rushing in, I'll be sure to address them. But if not, we'll go through today basically the mindsets and the tools, the tips and tools that you might want to consider to run your show. And so, the first thing I will mention, no matter where you are on this journey, is to think about simplification. That's something we don't talk about. We don't really think about when we start a new endeavor. It's like, if you're thinking about getting a car, you want to get the nicest one possible. And so when we thinking about starting our own podcast, it's actually really important to not overthink. Instead of thinking about what will be a setup that you think it's going to just blow the world away and it would just blow everybody's minds. Instead, think about, how you're able to do this in the long term. What is the longevity of your show? So to separate those questions, people often ask me, like, how long do I have to run my podcast for? There are things such as limited series of podcasts. Serial being one of them is certainly not the only one. So not everybody is necessarily want to podcast for the next 3, 5, 10 years, and that's okay. I actually know several very successful authors who launch their limited series podcasts, 7, 10 episodes, they conclude, well and good, they move on. But for the rest of us, many of us want to do this in the long run. And there's another thing that I want to mention is I've worked with and spoken with so many podcasters, and I noticed that money is an area that we don't talk about. Like, it's somehow like dirty word. As creators, we don't want to talk about money. And perhaps one thing is, if you're thinking about making money as a podcaster, it is a really challenging endeavor. I will be completely upfront with you. When you rely on only downloads alone or sponsorships or advertisers, they are looking at numbers. And that is something that can be difficult to achieve, right? But if you're thinking about how you're able to grow yourself as a speaker, grow your network, which we talked about yesterday, and podcasting is a great platform for that. So I'm really passionate about the topic today. Podcasting was the beginning of everything related to Feisworld, frankly. If it wasn't for my podcast, I wouldn't be standing here today. I wouldn't be a full-time content creator and working with, individual clients, working with brands. And I will absolutely be on a completely different trajectory. And podcasting enabled me to really have a platform that I can talk about, no matter how small. My platform was very, very small. At the beginning in 2014, I probably had on average, 10, 20, 30 listeners, and I treasured them, and I still do today. And there are people who are listeners today that were with me way back in 2014, and I've developed these much deepened relationship with them, and it's just phenomenal. And I think it's also podcasting is another tool to watch yourself transform. So I remember I can't really use myself as an example. When I was born, again in the 80s, I remember the biggest regret my mom still has today is that there were not a ton of pictures of me growing up. And she wished we had cell phones like this. That would just be absolutely transformative for our parents. But podcasting is a great way for you to monitor your own growth. Frankly, you might actually hate the first few episodes. Most of us do. You feel embarrassed. You don't like to listen to yourself. You feel like you're not really asking the good questions. You didn't have that many listeners. That's all okay because not over the years, over the weeks, months, and years, you're going to see how you truly transform in front of your own eyes. In fact, if you go back to my first live stream, granted, I've been a YouTuber now for 2 years, but if you go back to my first live stream, you probably see that I'm a little bit, how do I say this? Like a little bit nervous, not sure where this live stream will be going. And I spoke with a fellow creator just earlier today, Rob, who was saying like, "Faye, how's the live stream coming along? What have you learned so far?" Podcasting is the exact same way. You learn so much along the way. So, next, I want to move on to what I consider as the simplest way to get started with your podcast. So, some people will say, like, remember, there are people from parts of the world who don't have access to everything that's readily available as the way we see it, wherever you may be living, right? And so, it is absolutely possible to start with nothing else but your phone. Obviously, this is not by your phone. You're not going to be able to generate the best sound quality. So hopefully everybody's hearing from me. If you're on Instagram, you're not. But if you're listening and tuning in from elsewhere, you're listening. Right, my voice is now traveling through a Newman microphone and through an audio interface and into my live streaming tool, which is Restream. And now that produces a much higher quality sound. It's probably more intimate. And this is a more directional microphone. So it's eliminating a lot of the background noises. When you use your phone to record, unfortunately, those features are not there. It's capturing a lot of, kind of the surrounding sounds. And that's why we don't recommend anybody to record their podcast while they're standing outside. But, your phone has limitations, but you can still start a show. In fact, there are some solo shows I listened to at the beginning. I realized that if you just use your voice recording app and speak relatively close to your phone, the sound quality is not that bad. Now, to start with under $200, what you can do is you can literally buy a microphone. Research today on Amazon. You don't have to start with the Blue Yeti. A lot of podcasters like it. It actually has some problems, but it's doable. You can find a microphone for under $100, even under $50 these days, and you're able to basically start recording. Now you can record into your computer. A lot of us during the pandemic were using Zoom to record. Now, Zoom does not have the best quality sound. And in a second, I'm going to show you on the screen something that you could potentially consider, such as podcastle.ai. It is a tool and a brand I've been working with, and I really enjoy working with them, very authentic people. But something like Podcastle is an all-in-one, check it out, recording, editing, and publishing tool for podcasters or for podcasts. So with tools such as Podcastle, as well as riverside.fm, these tools allows you to basically record locally. That means if you are a podcaster recording into a high quality microphone like this, and who knows, you're having this conversation with one or multiple other people. Some people might be on the phone. I really hope this is not what they're doing. I really hope not. But they may be speaking into a microphone that's of a different quality or different nature than yours. Maybe some of them are running around. Maybe some of them are driving the car. Trust me, I've seen people recording podcasts from their car, and it's kind of hilarious. So you might have all these sort of background sounds and different, these are going to become technical challenges during post-production. Podcastle will enable you to get local recordings. And all you have to do is send your guests a link and they will be able to record natively from their device. And all that's uploaded, progressively uploaded to a cloud service. And then you get the final files. Trust me, whether you're editing your files or you're working with an audio engineer, they're going to thank you for it. So there is that. And Podcastle is really quite affordable. So we talked about microphone, the sound, and we haven't talked about hosting platforms. So back in the day, in 2014, I had to be looking at Tim Ferriss, Krista Tippett from On Being. I was trying to basically use the most reliable platform possible. And at the beginning, I chose Libsyn. And I was, Don Africa Production. Hello, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. We're talking about podcasting today. If you're thinking about starting one or, I don't know, guesting on somebody else's shows. But in recent years, I mean, at the beginning, here's why. I think when we start the show, we're thinking how to optimize it and we got to use it like the best quality. We got to be able to see all the analytics. And lovely to know somebody's watching all the way from Kenya. That's so special. Thank you. And we're thinking like, we put in all the effort. Hosting is everything. But a year ago, I moved Feisworld podcast and another show I started with my two friends, Adam Leffert and our show host, Gustavo Serafini, called Enabled Disabled Podcast at the beginning of the year. But you didn't see the first episode until April. And now Feisworld and Enabled Disabled Podcast and also Childhood Cancer Hall of Champions are all hosted on Anchor. I had reservations. Some of you guys probably read some very negative articles and about how unreliable they were. When Anchor was an independent company, I had my reservations as well. But today, it's backed by Spotify. And in my recent videos on YouTube, I openly talked about the importance of video podcasting, which if there's no takeaway, guys, if you're recording podcasts right now, please also record videos. You're not going to regret it. Even if you don't use videos right away, you're going to absolutely don't thank me, thank yourself for capturing videos from the very beginning. I wish I did that. I do not have like videos from the first 150 episodes. Very, very regretful. But Anchor is very reliable. And because it's backed by Spotify, now you become this cohort of like beta users. You're able to upload your video podcasts to Anchor. And that video version of it is going to be displayed on Spotify. You now have the option. You can even check out my podcast, Feisworld, on Spotify. You have the option to listen to audio, but also switching back and forth between audio and video. Why would somebody do that? You may be thinking is if I'm walking around and I most likely don't want to watch a video, obviously, but if I come home, I want to engage with the show host or the guests. I want to see them. I want to see them interact with one another. Videos are just fantastic. So that's definitely something to consider. One area I haven't talked about, which maybe there's a reason, is what are some of the ideas that you should think about? What are good ideas for podcasts and what are bad ideas for podcasts? I think we spend so much time dwelling on that. And my word of wisdom, really, after running Feisworld for so long, is that please don't spend too much time dwelling, thinking, rethinking about the title of your show, the description, why you're doing this, because you're going to change your mind at some point, possibly quickly at the beginning. And as a creator, you are allowed to change your mind. You're allowed to optimize the system. You're allowed to upgrade from a phone to a microphone. You're allowed to upgrade from recording from Zoom to maybe using podcasts. So you can change your minds. But what I have witnessed so much so is that people sit on a set of audios, sit on these ideas, and these ideas don't go anywhere. I also know creators who have set on their produced audios, but waiting for the perfect moment to release the podcast. And only did they find out 6 months, a year later, they either lost the motivation where they feel like the content's no longer relevant. I have a lot to argue about that, but please don't wait for too long. So hit record and make sure, you hit publish. And sometimes what I learned, and it's a really interesting thing lately, is that I noticed that some podcasters will at one point ditch their first podcast because it's no longer the podcast they want to build, but they learn so much from it and they build a second or even a third podcast, much stronger podcast with more listeners. So something to keep in mind that whenever, I'm going to be a first-time author, writer writing my first book. I too fell into the trap of thinking that, oh, in order to make my time worthwhile, I need this to be the absolute only best book I've ever written. And that actually becomes a detriment as opposed to be something really freeing and fun. So something to definitely keep in mind. So yeah, if there's no other takeaway, keep your setup very simple, keep your system simple. Have a microphone to start, it can be under $100, and record directly into Zoom or using podcasts. So launch it on Anchor. You're going to learn so much along the way. Please don't get talked into about how to fancy everything up, re-recording your voice intros, choosing from infinite number of background music, and then it's very simple. If you find yourself editing the first few episodes for days and weeks, you're overdoing it. Think about how sustainable that is in the long run. So one thing that we haven't talked about is getting help. In the previous episode of my live stream, I was very open about that everybody needs help and there's no shame in doing that. And I admitted that I found my help a little bit maybe too late. I wish I started with my producer in 2014, how much more powerful that would be. And that's okay if you start on your own. You're just still trying to figure out what you're doing, who you are. You're interested in learning audio engineering, who knows editing, but it's absolutely okay at one point to say, you know what? I can pass this on to somebody else. You can easily these days on Upwork, upwork.com, even on Fiverr to find help and find maybe 2 to 3 people to edit the same or edit 3 different episodes for you. You will immediately be able to tell if this is something you can outsource, it's something that you no longer have to do. And that just frees up your time, your mind space to focus on something else. Maybe that time is about finding the next guest, finding the next idea. Speaking of guests, a lot of us running podcasts today are looking for guests. There are plenty of solo shows, and you can also incorporate solo episodes into your interview formatted podcast. But a lot of us are working with other people. And by the way, that's a really great way to start your show, especially if you're worried about, hey, I don't want to run out of things to say on my show if I'm the only person. And I agree, it is hard at the beginning. So doing interview shows is one of the most straightforward ways to start your show and a great platform that you can build to actively learn from other people. I have a few things to say about famous people. The question is, do you absolutely need famous people on your show? If so, how do you get them? And I I'm very thankfully did not really follow that path. For my first few episodes, I thought to myself, I'm going to try to learn as much as possible. Let me go ahead and interview some family, friends, my colleagues. They were great. They knew me, they trusted me, they were having fun. And I didn't, nobody felt obligated. Like I'm doing Faye this huge favor. We're just sharing these authentic conversations. And those conversations later on, I recall whenever I felt down, I was struggling with something maybe in my personal and my professional life, I would listen. I would go back and listen to those episodes and appreciated those people have once again, they were once my mentor, my friends. Now, moving on to the famous people, you notice a lot of the shows, some of the popular shows, people trying to make this huge splashes to say, I finally launched my show and I interviewed, look at these people, I don't know, Tony Robbins, Seth Godin, like everybody's on the front page. They feel it's really necessary so that these people can attract other famous people. It works to a certain degree. There's something you have to prepare yourself for when you interview these tier 1, tier 2 people. Number one, they most likely will not share this episode on their platforms. Think about it. If you're just getting started, in fact, if you have under 10 or even 30 episodes, a lot of these more tier 1 prolific thinkers, teachers will choose not to appear on your show. They'll be very upfront. I like when people say, no, I don't want to be on your show versus people who never respond. By the way, for those people, just again, best practice. But when you interview somebody really prolific, they are not going to share their 80,000 subscriber email list. They're not going to share their platform of 1, 2, 3 million followers and say, well, today I'm so honored to be interviewed by Faye and check out this episode. They simply will not do that. And sometimes I go back. I wish that, yes, I admit, I wish some of the podcast guests could do a little bit more for the platform. But I would say, like, when you interview everyday people, not only you have more authentic conversations, they're much more likely to share the conversation. They may be a little bit shy, not because of you, but they may be worried about being judged, not because they are there to necessarily have to share their platform with you. Something to keep in mind for sure. But there are benefits to sometimes interview big names, because then you can use their names to attract other big names and, more, I don't know, famous people. I hate to use the word famous people even. These influencers, don't like that either. But when you interview other influencers, they might go back to your platform. Most likely they will. You can say, hey, I have once interviewed Seth Godin, and I think you really enjoy being on the platform. Here are the questions we talk about. They will go back and look at it and think that, okay, I'm sure that this person's vetted Faye's platform. Therefore, there's a reason I'm more comfortable appearing on her show, in her documentary as well. I wish more people talked about that. And these are some of the lessons learned. And thank you, Don Africa, and things you have taught. You teach here helped me a lot. I really appreciate you guys. And please, if you are listening, watching during or after this episode, feel free to let me know what else you would like to learn. By the way, on Feisworld Academy, which is feisworld.podia.com, there's a link in description below. I have spoken about how to start your podcast, how to grow your show, how to start your YouTube channel at the New York Public Library. And I've since then basically repurposed that content to be completely free master classes for people to download and tune in. So by clicking on that link, you're going to find all the resources I've created for YouTube, for Zoom, for podcasting. So I am sure I've missed other things that I want to talk about, but I'm going to conclude today's session. If you like this, I'm pretty sure you're going to like the one for tomorrow, because I will be very openly talk about how to monetize your podcast, not the traditional way. But I think a smarter way where you're going to see much more revenue, not just coming from sponsorships and advertising, but working with your guest referrals, with listeners. That is extremely powerful. In fact, my parting words here would be, especially if you're a creator, content creator, or you have a business, think about how you can potentially integrate your podcast or your YouTube channel. But here we're talking podcasting with your business. Can this podcast drive more leads? Can your podcast help tell the stories that you wouldn't otherwise share, maybe on your website? The behind the scenes. If you work with partners, other influencers, maybe you can invite them to join you on the podcast. So people now know more about not just you and your business, they get to know more about your vendors, the people that you choose to work with, right? That is huge. I know, especially these days, people are very environmentally conscious. Maybe that's why you can interview certain suppliers to show them behind the scenes. There are many, many different opportunities. Again, leave me any comments, guys. Thank you so much for being here for 30-day live. I've learned so much because of you, and I'll see you tomorrow at the exact same time, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard or noon Pacific time. And that's it. Much love to the community. First, by Instagram, and secondly, by everyone everywhere else. YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn. I'll see you tomorrow.